The night side of Coruscant was a maze of light and shadow. The Durasteel canyons breathing their slow mechanical breath, while storm-glass windows held the reflections of endless skylanes. Above the dark ribs of the temple, the sky was the color of wet slate, and the traffic lanes stitched it with patient sequins. In the upper cloisters, where the hum of the city softened into a pressure more felt than heard, Master Halia Neral moved as if her steps had been measured by the place before she was born. She carried no lantern. The archive did not need one. It was its own star. The doors parted at her approach. Stone and silence, and the scent of old oils. She had learned the pattern of the archive's air, the way a musician learns the embrace of her instrument. The honey-dry whisper of parchment that did not exist and yet persisted. The latent cold that lived behind the vault's archival fields. The clean note of filtered ozone from the electrostatic dust wards. She stood a long time at the threshold, letting the quiet straighten her thoughts. It was late. The temple's rhythms had rolled into that deep midnight trough, when even the gardeners in the atrium below slept, and the meditation spire exhaled only one steady beacon instead of four. Halia's breath, narrow as a blade's edge, moved in and out until her heartbeat was a metronome for the room. It was an old habit from the days before she ascended to archivist. In the field, she had called it letting the terrain speak. The stacks recognized her glyph and unfolded their inner concentricities, revealing tiers of crystalline shelves grown from a base matrix and seeded with data globes, amber-slotted Kyber facets, and the rare leather sheaths of High Republic facsimiles. She found the record she had come for without looking. A hexagonal holocron whose metal edges had been burnished by many patient thumbs, whose faceplate carried a gossamer crack that was older than the modern Republic. It had been catalogued under rival names over centuries: the Wellspring Cantos, the Points of Balance, the Circle Seed Song, and the indexing never quite stuck. Like any wild creature, it resisted the harness. Halia cupped it with both hands and brought it to the scholar's alcove she preferred, an open window of air within a raised well, ringed by dark seats, beneath a ceiling that was a shallow dome incised with Dawn War sigils. The plinth before her hummed when the holocron touched it, tiny gyroscopic stabilizers engaged with a sigh like a falling page. The facets on the cube sank and rose in a slow dance of consent. Halia bowed to the construct, because courtesy, even to machines with spirits, was a discipline that preserved one's own. "Good evening," she said. "Will you open for one who wishes to correct a mistake?" The gate unfolded. A small, severe avatar appeared, thin and severe as a quill, pale blue, eyes like polished ink. It was the recorded personality of some forgotten seer, who had lived through the detailing of the Outer Rim's first star maps, and later the epidemiologies of the Triani plague. The voice that came out of the holocron carried the fine rasp of dry leaves and nearness of a whisper at one's ear. "What mistake deserves the patience of night, Master Neral?" She did not answer in words, not immediately. She let the question sink through her like dye in water, then let the force carry the meaning outward. The archive felt it and grew subtly awake. The light stayed low, but the negative spaces of the alcoves became warmer, as if some buried furnace had been stoked a single notch. Halia placed on the plinth a sliver of microfilm, then a data card, then a physical transcript bound with wire. Together, they were centuries of argument layered on one topic, until the pages seemed to sweat with it. "The prophecy of balance," she said at last. "What it says. What we think it says. What it fails to say because we will not let it." The avatar's head inclined. "Ah, the matter of the One. Yes. You do not believe in such singularities, Master Neral. I believe in the Force. And the Force is not a spear point. It is a river." "Nantam so." The avatar did not smile because it had not been recorded with smiles. "Ask then. I have only that which was given to me when I was alive. But sometimes old instruments carry a truer scale than the newer." Halia reached outward and inward, her palms flat on the edge of the plinth. She felt the city through the temple, and the temple through the city and herself, as one semi-permeable thing between the two. Far below, 3 levels down, someone sneezed and stifled it. On the east transept, a Padawan's heel scuffed, then hesitated and settled. In the council garden, the wind had turned. Around and beneath it all, Coruscant breathed the way it had always breathed, with the patience of numbers so vast no single mind could hold them. The river of the Force took that in and did not strain. "I need the original phrasing," she said softly. "Not the standardized verse, not the council's canon. The first ash and bones of the words." The wellspring holocron flickered. Script emerged, cured with the faint curve of an old hand. Not the bright Republic basic calligraphy that landed on temple walls and in easy primers, but the angular, iron-stroked letters of Old Elise Korean, with its duals and collectives, its habit of making one sound carry four. Halia read it as if tasting something she had eaten as a child, and had not known the shape of her hunger until now. When the line is unbound, the sum will seek its middle, and this is called balance. The Avatar spoke as the letters traced themselves in air. "Language is an instrument and a trap, Master Nirral. The translation you all use, 'One will come, and balance shall be restored,' was made by a committee with a taste for declarations. The original does not specify a solitary hero. It names a pattern. The line. Bender." Halia closed her eyes. The old scholars used to say that truth was a kind of temperature. She felt the room warm by a degree. It was nothing anyone else would have noticed. She had learned to notice. "We taught ourselves to hear it with a crown," she said. "A coronation of a single soul. We narrowed it because we wanted the story to be catchy and clean, because we wanted to believe that if we could just find one syllable to fit the lock, the door would open and the light would pour through forever. Now, stories prefer crowns," the Avatar said mildly. "They are easier to draw on banners, but the line is harder to wear out. It bends, it threads, it holds." "In the old tongue," Halia whispered, "the word for one can be a cohort." Just so. Wind returned to the council garden. A tree's leaves scratched one another as if discussing it. Halia did not shiver. She had slept beneath snowbanks on Elam, and had floated in the boiled air above Sauron's sunken mines. But she felt the way one feels when a word heard many times as a child suddenly reveals a second meaning, a new door where there had always been a wall. Her palms warmed the metal. The holocron's avatar lowered its gaze, and a new passage unfolded, untouched by the canonized version. "A vergence shall mark the thread's emergence. It will be mistaken, and the mistake will be a pushing hand. The thread will resist none of this. It is the nature of thread to be pulled and resist without breaking. The thread is not a destiny because destiny is a room with a door and thread does not live in rooms." She could see it then, not in pictures, but in the space where pictures begin. A long arc of choices, not owned by one person, not contained by one lifetime. The living force passing into forms and leaving again, like wind moving through long grass. The grass was no single blade. The wind was no single push. There had been old hints of this in the treatise of Vola, in the notes Master Pill had left behind after the rest of deliveries, in Yin's question of the two flames where he had made a parable out of a double wick, and the way a single match could light both without losing itself. "Show me who first taught the story wrong," Halia said, but she heard the childishness in the question as soon as she asked it. The holocron could not show her blame. It only held light, and light did what it did when doors were open. "You will have to do that part," said the Avatar. She nodded. "Then, I will do it gently." When she left the archive, morning had not yet begun. But the east side of the sky had lightened by an idea. She stood on the balcony that overlooked the temple gardens, and watched the first stingflies test the air. The city's lower bands were beginning their shift, and the construction cranes along the Senate district had raised their long necks. Halia drew her robe close, and felt the wrongness of what would happen in coming years as a coolness under the nails. She did not see the war that had not yet come, but she felt the ground lean. She had time to seed a thought in minds that would outlive her. That was what the old passage had called the usual courtesies of thread. Later that same year, a tall man knelt in the same archive, and the holocron opened for him as if it had been waiting. He had the loose long lines of a man used to walking long distances, when the air was not fit to breathe. the eyes of someone who had looked at suns without flinching. He wore his hair short, and the scar on his cheek made a thoughtful parenthesis around his smile. The Guardians had not yet learned to say his name with ease, because despite the softness of his voice, he was not a man who bent inward smoothly when a room pressed him to. If the room insisted, he had a way of opening a window. "Good evening," said the Avatar. He bowed deeper than Halia had, though he was not yet as old. "Good evening to you. You have been thinking about the verse," the Avatar observed. "You have been thinking about it with your feet." He laughed softly. "I have been thinking about it with my whole body. It has become a conversation my bones keep having with one another when the rest of me wants to sleep." "Then?" "Ask then." The tall man placed his hands on his thighs, palms down. His breath slowed. He looked like a man listening to a faraway instrument. He had not come to prove, only to compare notes. "I have seen rocks that aren't supposed to exist," he said. "In the middle of deserts that aren't supposed to be there, with a shadow that throws light. I have stood in a cavern where the ground seemed to fold itself like a great sheet, not down but sideways, and I felt the force there like heat in black iron, or wind caught in wood. It made a sound that wasn't a sound in my ears, and I thought, this feels like a beginning, except it is in the middle of everything. That is where the word vergence took its meat for me. I understand how we could mistake the feeling for a crown. I understand the hunger of the mistake. But I think we have mistaken what the verb is." "Now." "Which verb?" "To come." The Avatar did not smile. It had not been recorded with that trick. "And what is the correct verb in your thought?" "To continue," said the man. "And to cross." The archive heard them without judging. The city outside did what it did, patched itself, negotiated with its own weight, sang its low steel songs. The man's shoulders relaxed the way they always did when a thought he had feared might be arrogance showed itself to be merely ordinary, and therefore safe. "I believe there is a line," he said, "a thread, as some of the oldest phrasing says. The line shows up where the force meets the will of living things and makes a negotiation. A child is born and refuses to hate. A mother lets go and does not break. A friend tells the truth at personal cost. A hunter stops because a bird spoke a second time. Small things. Small decisions. You see, I do not think the Force loves banners as much as we do. I think it loves repairs. I think it loves to enter cracks." "Now." "And you hope to follow the thread," the Avatar said, "or to stand where the line crosses and make yourself light to it." The tall man flattened his hands. "I would not make myself anything more than a good place to pass through," he said. "But I've learned to recognize a current when it moves my hair. There is a child, I think. I have had dreams. I do not trust dreams much, but I have learned to take them like weather. Do not go out without a cloak if the sky says rain. And my dreams say this child is near a place where the desert is older than the language for thirst. I want to go. I need the..." The Avatar turned the script and let the older letters breathe. The words did not name a man. They named a river and the way handlines are tied across a crossing, so others may use them later. "Then go," the holocron said simply. "And do not forget that the line goes on after any single hand lets go. It is not a single life's apology for another's mistake. It is not an arithmetical correction. It is a craft. You will not finish it. You are allowed to begin again. Then now." The man bowed again, and if a listener had not known his face, they would have known his name by the sound of that bow. Qui-Gon, who bowed as if gravity itself were something he could be on friendly terms with. Qui-Gon, who could sit for hours beside a broken engine and fall in love with the small secrets of each bolt while talking about stars. He was not a man for committee statements. He could listen to a good answer and still take the long way around to test it against the shape of a cliff. He left the archive with his cloak over his arm, and the night took him in with the careless welcome it always offered to a man who walked like a long answer to a better question. In the underlevels, far from the temple, a droid hissed with leaking coolant, and a woman scolded it as if it were her own child. She used the old outer rim curses that have the flavor of sand. In a tenement that had learned to hold hands with the next building in a high wind, a boy woke from a dream about running along a wire that stretched between two moons. He held the image long enough to feel his heartbeat make a small friend with the wire's vibration, then let it go, because morning work was early and the dream must not be too heavy to carry. The city did not notice him. The city had billions of such motions every hour, and this was simply one. But the force took the small warmth of what he had dreamed and put it into a pocket where it keeps such things in case someone needs them later. On Tatooine the night was cold and thin, and the stars were very close. Shmi Skywalker sat with her hands around a cup. She had learned to make last 4 sips last as long as a conversation. The sand outside wore its own breath like a veil. It had been a good day. Anakin had returned with a face both triumphant and guilty, because he had bartered 2 broken pieces into one half-working module, and could not decide whether this was a victory or a crime. He had talked all evening about the name of a screw, and whether a bearing could be taught to prefer one direction to another if one spoke to it softly enough. He had fallen asleep mid-sentence, the last word tucked into the corner of his mouth like a nut a rodent keeps for later. Shmi had watched his breath a while, because that was the evening's prayer she could make. Watching that breath and not insisting it be anything other than what it was. She was not a scholar. She did not have the archive's cold, delicious air in her lungs when she read. She had the air of a house that has been built a little too fast, on the cheap, by hands that had to keep stopping to rub their wrists. But she knew lines. Every day was a line. The house a line. The boy a line. The stories that reached her through slave gossip about the old sorcerers in the Corps who hoarded light and spent it when they needed to keep ships in the sky. A line. She had learned to mend that way too, not with one perfect stitch, but with many small ones wearing through and being remade, making a seam that was a kind of resilience. She did not believe in crowns because crowns were hats for people who owned words like own. Her dreams that night were quiet. The desert made a sound under them like a pot cooling. She woke before dawn and listened to her son breathe, and felt the small, perfectly sized dread in her throat that every mother wakes with, because love trains you to stand at a cliffside forever. She put her hand over his foot beneath the blanket, and felt him twitch into a little sigh without waking. She thought, there are other feet somewhere that will walk with him. She did not know why the thought came like that, with the certainty of a sentence that arrives in a second language and does not need to be translated. She did not pursue it because that would have been to do it, the discourtesy of doubt. She simply thought each morning after that of other feet, other walking, not as comfort, not as prophecy, but as the kind of ordinary that holds up miracles without breaking. When Qui-Gon came to Mos Espa, dust coated the hem of his robe and his eyes were narrowed, not in suspicion, but in carefulness, as if he were trying not to disturb a sleeping animal. He moved the way he always moved, with that loose grace that looks like laziness until one realizes it is conservation. He listened with his skin. He let the market teach him before he asked it questions. He let the smell of oil think through him. He watched the way that the heat held the children like a teacher who has too many pupils and not enough chairs. He went to the places where luck was supposed to be, and waited for it to argue with him. When Shmi came out to ask if she could help him, he felt the small tightening in the air that happens when the thread arrives in a room it has already passed through in another way. It did not feel like a crown. It felt like a knot being checked for soundness. Shmi saw him looking at the boy the way mechanics look at engines, gentle, alert, already assembling and disassembling with his eyes, and she made herself smile in such a way that both invited and warned. It was a whole language she had learned after ankle irons, a way of saying, "You may come in, but not with fire hands." Qui-Gon did not come with fire hands. He crouched by Anakin's worktable and touched the wing of a toy he had built out of scrap in the shape of a bird that had never flown on Tatooine. He did not praise it. He asked it a question as if it were a person. "What do you think you will sing when you have air?" Anakin rose to the bait at once. "It depends," he said, in the voice of one who has been waiting to be taken seriously since his first word. "If the air is hot, I think it will sing like metal. Hot metal whistles, did you know? But if the air is cold, It might sing like my mother's kettle before it thinks about being afraid. Machines get afraid? Only if you let them be alone, Anakin said. He lifted the bird with both hands, as if he had only just remembered how to be gentle, and the lesson delighted him, as if it were new each time. If you are with them, they are not afraid. I think it's like that for people. But I don't know about people. I haven't met enough kinds yet. Shmi looked at Qui-Gon. Because this was one of those moments a mother keeps as a small coin, then does not spend except at the last possible hour. Qui-Gon smiled without showing his teeth. I think you are right, he said. About both. He could feel, beneath the moment, the older movement of the line. In the archive the words had been severe and thin. Here they were thick and bright, and covered in dust and apricot peelings. There's a particular flavor to the way the Force lifts the hair on one's arm and makes the mouth taste of iron. This was not that. This tasted like stone after rain. He could feel behind it the small gravitational adjustment that happens the first time a planet receives a signal from a star it had not been listening to before. He thought, with a mixture of relief and something he could not name, of course it is not a crown. How could the Force trust any throne? Later, when they spoke about midi-chlorians and virginces and practical matters like sponsorship and the human problem of money, he did not forget the way the boy had asked about the air's temperature. He did not forget that in the archive the words had named a thread. He did not take the boy for a destiny, only for a door. He thought of the feat Shmi had not told him about, but had already imagined in the night. He thought of threads as the long, patient favors the universe asks of us without hope of being paid back within a single life. On Coruscant, beneath the temple, there is a chamber older than the city. The Jedi do not write about it in their pamphlets. It is not secretness. It is modesty. The room makes a sound like salt poured from a height. The stone walls are carved with spirals that are almost worn flat, because time is a singer and sings down ornament first. Master Halia brought her notes there. She lay down a cold stone with her palms out and thought about pronouns. She tried to see every student she had taught making decisions with their small hands. She tried to remember every time she had left a room, and the room had gone on without her. When she rose, she did not feel a revelation. She felt a good tiredness, like after sweeping. She took her notes to the council, and the council did what councils do when presented with something that takes away a crown. They listened, and then they asked whether the old words were not dangerous, whether they might not let someone excuse inaction, whether minors might not misinterpret the comfort of being not singular as permission to be slack. And she said, not without kindness, that anyone who wanted an excuse for slackness did not need old words. They could find it in any weather. And she pointed out that banners do not make the wind blow. Mace Windu, who wore carefulness like a cloak on a night when he refused to show the cold the color of his teeth, watched her and did not move. The vein near his temple made a slow bracket. You were saying, he said, that even if a single person were born with a role that we might nickname chosen, the role itself would be a crossing, and others would be in that crossing without eroding its necessity. I am saying the Force does not work with crowns, Halia said. It works with hands. Yoda's eyelids lowered until they nearly met. He smelled rain he had smelled only on a few worlds. He said. Many steps in a dance. But dance knows its song it does. Things with one leg fall down. Yet not all songs need drums. He smiled into his own thought, as if embarrassed by its untidy grammar. If line it is, sing more must we, not shout one note. Obi-Wan sat very straight. He was a man who had taught his own bones to imitate spears until they believed themselves sharper than they were, because to lower oneself between harm and what must be kept safe is a form of love as real as bread. He thought of Qui-Gon and the way his master would talk to a ship before boarding it. He thought of the word thread and the smallness of it, and wondered if perhaps smallness was a form of loyalty he had neglected. He did not say this aloud. He filed it. He would take it out later, when alone, and try it against what he had been taught to prefer. They did not vote to change the verse on the temple's outer wall. The letters were already cut deep, and tourists took pictures there. But Halia's treatise made its way as good things do, tucked into the back of primers, whispered at the feet of fountains, taught to initiates who needed to be protected from both arrogance and despair. She taught one class under the Great Holoski where the dawn is simulated precisely 47 minutes after the first transports begin their shift, and she taught them to breathe in sets of 7 as they listened. She told them nothing about the boy in the desert, because she did not know him yet, and because it is unkind to put faces on rivers. Rivers will carry their own reflections when they are ready. But she showed them how to tie handlines across a crossing. Anakin won a race and then lost a home. The boy cried the way an engine seizes when oil is a half-cup low. Qui-Gon stood nearby and let the boy's small body learn what it had to learn. He told him the truth in the way he always told the truth, gently when he could, directly when he must, without dressing it in the clothes of callousness. He made a small knot of his own grief and carried it in his pocket, as men like him always do, because the pocket is a way to keep something without making it into a banner. Shmi watched them go and said the prayers she could say without names, and the desert under her house hummed a note she would never hear and did not need to. On the transport, Anakin looked at the stars, the way boys who have not yet learned they are supposed to be impressed by certain shapes look at anything, with ownership that is the opposite of greed. Obi-Wan. Still a little offended by Qui-Gon's refusal to speak like a map, watched the boy and kept count of how many times his face turned to look for a mother who had not boarded. He put the number away, because keeping numbers is a form of mercy sometimes. Qui-Gon did not count. He kept his hand on the floor near where the boy's bare feet chose to stand, and let his fingers learn how the ship's vibrations changed when the boy moved. He did not call this an experiment. Experiment was a banner word. This was simply a man finding out, as carpenters find out about knots before they cut plank. He had not told the council about the old phrasing he had read in the archive, not because he wished to be secretive, but because he was still trying it on his bones. He did not think any of this would absolve them of the practical obligations of war and peace. He did not think the thread meant he had found a careful walkway to save him from risk. He did think, as Anakin fell asleep with his shoulder pressing, that the sound a boy makes when sleep finally breaks through grief is very much like the sound stone makes after rain. And he thought of feet, unknown, that would someday walk far beyond his own steps, and he thought of how the Force might pass its hand between those feet and over and between them, like a weaver, choosing which line to pull this time. When they reached Coruscant, the city did what all cities do to strangers. It offered to swallow them and be kind about it. The night they landed, rain salted the broad terraces of the temple, and the air smelled like a clean blade. Anakin stood at the base of a great stair, and looked up at a distance that was not measured in meters. Somewhere in its heart, the archive breathed in. Halia, on her way to a meditation lesson with 4 initiates, who were more interested in how to run without being heard than in learning the letters for silence, saw the boy, saw Qui-Gon, saw the Guardian standing behind him with a face that had learned the trick of not moving in order to make others believe it felt nothing. She felt, not the shock of destiny, but the small courteous movement that old strings make when a new hand touches the instrument. She went to the lesson and taught the initiates how to breathe in sets of 7. When they asked why the set could not be 8, she said because 7 is a good number for beginnings that are not the first. She did not expect them to understand. It is the nature of threads to be tied by hands that will not be the ones to unfasten them. The council spoke again, this time not about letters, but about a boy. People who love safety spoke as they will. People who love risk spoke as they do. People who love the letters of the law made columns in their head and tried to offer those columns to the wind to see if the wind would care. It did not. Yoda's ears made the small movement they make when he keeps a joke to himself. Macy's jaw made the line it makes when his internal soldier turns and looks out through his eyes and requests an assignment. Obi-Wan, asked to speak, said something so careful it might have cut the room if it had not been carried by a voice that already knew the cost of being the instrument of someone else's song. "We must be clear about what we are saying," he said, and Halia noticed that his use of "we" was not the "we" of a banner, but the "we" of a net. If we agree that balance is our task, then we must not require that a child be the only weight on the scale. It is our business to be on the scale with him. Yoda said again, because some words deserve that sound. The verse did not change. The years did what years do when men and women try to fight them with declarations. The war came, and the war chose its hours without consulting the temple's weather. Anakin grew the way lightning grows. Fast, dirty with things it should never have had to touch, beautiful even when breaking. He made errors for the most human reasons. He loved the way one loves when love is the first bread ever tasted, and one tries to eat it all at once. He wanted to fix a hurt that had no edges. When he could not, the hurt taught him to sharpen himself into a thing that could cut. The line did not break when he fell. That is not to say nothing broke. Many things did. Many things must be grieved by many sets of hands. The archive sent light into quiet rooms. Halia wrote the names of those lost in ink that did not like to be washed, and then washed her hands and smelled the iron of it, and remembered the feeling she had under the stones and the taste of her breath then. She found no solace in the old verse. It had not promised to console. It had named a craft. She told her students to keep tying the lines across the crossings. She told them to look for other feet, even when they were alone on a stair. In the years after the fire, when smoke still lived in the cold metal of places that had never burned, a young woman stood in the skeleton of a library on a small world people forgot once commerce stopped visiting, and she lifted a spine blackened by flame and blue ash that had once been words off her palm. Her hair was bound back in a way that would not catch on broken steel. She did not have a lightsaber. She did not have a map. She had a list of children she would find if the stars were kind, and if they were unkind, she would teach herself to be kinder than they were. She did not know Halia's footnote about the thread, but she had been taught by quieter ghosts. She did not call herself a Jedi because that was a word too clever for where she had to go. She called herself a person who holds hands. Luke stood, years later, on an island whose stones were older than most grudges. The wind there sang before it thought, and he had come to learn how to do the same. He had seen banners and learned to distrust them, even the ones with his own face painted on them, especially those. He had seen what a crown can ask of a boy, and what a boy might become when the crown refuses to come off, even when the head bleeds. He had read no archives. He had listened to ghosts who did not know his language and yet found him anyway. He understood threads because he had spent months repairing nets with his hands for food. The sea had shown him how to love a thing that tears every day and must be made whole every evening for the next morning, to mean bread. He sat on a wet stone and felt the line come to him as a thing not owned by any one of the people who had made it. He saw a mother's hand on a sleeping boy's foot, on a night with a cold desert under it. He saw a tall man kneel to greet a toy as if it were a bird not yet in the air. He saw a woman lie on stone and decide that teaching is a verb worth sweating for. He saw himself walk away from a cold room because some doors do not open until you go outside and wait for the rain to finish. He thought of his sister laughing the first time the wind on Yavin tangled her hair, and how she had made a plan out of nothing but the sound of that laughter and kept people alive with it. Balance, he thought, was a verb, not a number, not a crown. A verb that keeps being done in hands. He stood then, because the wind told him someone was crossing the narrow bridge between a cave and the cliff. He went to meet them because that, too, was a verb. In the temple of the city that had learned to call itself the center of any map it could afford, dust settled in the archive without ceremony. Halia was gone by then. Her student now tended the stacks. The Wellspring Cantos waited. No one visited it for a while, because there were not many left to visit, and because what was left to hold had to be held with different fingers for a time. But the holocron did not mind waiting. Light does not get impatient the way living things do. When the door opens, it will go out. The Avatar's eyes remained the color of polished ink. The crack across the faceplate continued to refuse to grow. In a season that had forgotten its ribs, a traveler came, old enough to let his hair be exactly what it had always wanted to be, tired enough to finally enjoy how his knees talked to him when weather changed. He held out his hand and the holocron opened without being asked. The Avatar inclined its head. The old man laughed, surprised at how natural the sound was in that room. He read the letters that spoke in a tongue he did not know, and he understood them because he had been taught by stone and wind. He lay down on the floor, because that is sometimes the best way to get a room to tell you the truth. When he rose, he did not feel absolved. He felt asked. He left the archive and found a girl who had learned to carry a staff not as a weapon, but as a way to feel the ground while crossing. He did not tell her the verse. He gave her a piece of bread and asked her to tell him a story as payment. She told him about the time she had eaten alone in a place that makes people forget how to chew, and he laughed until his eyes leaked. Later, when she lifted a lightsaber for the first time, and the room flooded with old banners trying to climb on her shoulders, he gently brushed them away like gnats. "You are not a crown," he said. "You are a bridge. What if I fall? We all fall. The craft is getting up and tying a line across where you fell so someone else does not have to." On nights when she could not sleep, she felt for that line with her toes in the dark, the way you learn a stair with your foot before you trust your weight to it. On mornings when the idea of being singular tried to sit on her chest, she pictured other feet. She pictured a woman's tooth-worn smile in a hot kitchen on a cold night. She pictured a boy asking a bird to sing. She pictured a teacher counting in sevens under a false dawn. She pictured the old man beside her, putting his hand on the floor of the ship, and not making it into a ceremony. Across the galaxy there are 1,000 rooms where no one will ever build a monument. In those rooms the Force prefers to keep certain songs. A nurse holds a patient's hand when the medicine arrives late, and the pain is not late. A pilot does not fire when the target looks up, and voices a name the pilot remembers from a childhood under a different map. Two friends who hate each other's opinions continue to show up with food. A child teaches a machine it is not alone. The line lives in those rooms. The line crosses those rooms without asking permission to be honored. If one needs a story, one can make it the story of a family that keeps failing and repairing. Not because they are written to do so, but because they choose it after the lines run out of other choices. If one needs a figure, one can choose any pair of hands. If one needs a verse, one can go down into the room under the temple, or any room that has learned to hold breath, and lie on the stone and ask nicely. A storm will come again. Banners will be woven because people are the kind of animals who weave banners. A child not yet born will make a sound in a market, and someone far away will turn their head because the sound is not a sound, it is a pressure change before weather. Someone will mistake a verb for a noun. Someone will cut letters into walls. Someone will read them in a language that remembers how to make a singular hold a cohort. And in the midst of this, a bridge will be tied. Then another, between feet that belong to people who will never meet and still know how to walk in step because the craft was taught to them without a lecturer, without a crown, on nights when the room smelled like iron and stone after rain. Qui-Gon once told a Padawan under a tree that had survived lightning twice, "You must learn to bow to the thing you do not yet understand without giving it your neck." He said it in his unhandsome voice, full of pauses, as if the words kept stopping to see whether they had just overstepped. The Padawan had not understood, not then. It had taken a war and a boy and a fall, and the smell of a scorched library to teach him. He remembered the way the old master had touched the bark where the lightning had entered. He remembered the ring the wound had made. Bright, irregular, honest. He remembered thinking, the tree did not choose lightning, and yet it is good. He thought of that over and over in later years, when choosing to be good felt like bowing to an empty room. Halia, long gone, would have smiled at that tree. She would have written its rings into the margin in the very particular ink she had used for the names that would not wash away. She would have said to any student beside her, "Look, the line is in the wood." She would have said, "It is not that there was one who rose to wear a crown and made all songs right forever. It is that hands kept doing a verb. It is that bread kept being passed with more care than the quarrel it interrupted. It is that a city made of light learned to sing down its ornaments and still hold its beams." On the night when the boy who had been a slave fell to his knees in a room he had filled with terror, and begged a son he had never properly taught to kill him, the line did not clap for a moral. It did what lines do. It crossed, carrying weight as gently as it could. It would cross again the next day, and the next. It would carry a girl over a gap, and it would teach a man to lay down a weapon he had cleverly built to be his whole name. It would hold, not because it was destiny, but because so many hands had touched it that it knew the shape of touch by heart. If there is a prophecy, then perhaps it is not a headline. Perhaps it is a recipe, passed from kitchen to kitchen, with smudged corners and measures written in the language of hands. Perhaps it says, in a tongue that is older than any podium, when you feel the pull, do not let go. And if you must let go, tie a new knot and tell the next person where. Perhaps it says, line will be mistaken for crown. Do not be angry at the mistake. Invite it to supper, then show it where the handlines are. On Coruscant the night side breathes as it always has. The archive hums. The council garden's leaves touch each other the way they do when they are not ready to admit they miss the wind. Airplanes blink at one another like tired birds. Somewhere underground, in a room that does not boast, a holocron waits for the next pair of hands and the next question. The city does not know this is happening. The city does not need to know. It is only important that the line keep being held. And it is.